Hey, 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 happy Tuesday with Tamika. Thank you guys so much for joining me for yet another episode of Tuesday with Tamika, where y'all already know what it is. We believe in lifting as we climb, turning our trials into treasures, living a life to inspire and not impress, and allowing God to fully restore us. And as you know, we have added a fifth core value to the podcast. And our fifth core value is loving as if you have never been hurt. Make sure you guys are writing those down because I want to see you guys posting those core values on social media. I am super excited about today's episode. This will be our first guest episode of 2024. I am excited. I think you guys are really going to enjoy the story and just the life of this amazing guest that I have on today. Before I bring her on, I wanted to give us a quote that comes directly from her website. We'll make sure that we have all her links in the show notes for you to be able to go over and check her out. But as soon as I saw this quote, I said, oh, yeah, she's my type of sister. So this quote says, only you have the power to choose how you will respond to the storms of life. Here in Southern California, we have a little storm going on right now. You guys know Californians, we don't do weather. We don't do weather, and we definitely don't do well with any type of rain. We don't do snow at all, but we don't do well. But what I do know is it doesn't matter what's going on outside. It matters what's going on inside of you and how you are grounded, what your grounded principles are, who you believe to be the captain of the storm, the captain of the ship. Y'all already know where I'm going. I ain't gonna talk too much longer. I want to bring my sister on because I believe that she is going to have a lot of good, juicy information to add to this conversation. Hey, sis, you have a minute?
I do, and I'd love to spend it with you.
Thank you so much. So my guest today is Katrina Robinson. Oh, you have a story to tell. Tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Well, sure. I guess if we just kind of do the general biography, I am in Hot Springs, Arkansas, kind of central Arkansas in a national park. Been married for going on 28 years now. Have five children, two biological, three are adopted, two adopted from foster care. One we actually adopted as an adult. So a different story there. Professionally, I'm a financial advisor, uh, wealth management, investment management, that kind of thing. Been doing that at a local wealth management firm for goodness, 17 years, I think now. And and then last year went through just one of them seasons of storms and trials, both literally and figuratively. And I thought, telling our stories is important. I want to tell this story. And so I wrote a little memoir and published it uh, as soon as it all finished. And so now I kind of add author to my list. And then that's opened up the doors to do a little bit of public speaking as well.
I love that. I love that. And as I can see in your background, probably one of the titles that you did not add to your resume or to your bio is Woman of God. I can tell that you truly, just from skimming through your website and some of your core beliefs, that is some of the grounding principles that lead your life. I mean, to have two babies already and then adopt three, you got to have something higher than yourself
Yeah,
leading
yeah.
inside of you.
When I have people approach me asking questions about adoption, specifically adoption and through foster care and fostering, my first question is always, are you called? Because if you do not feel a deep indwelling of a sense of this is the path I am to take, it will absolutely, it has the possibility of destroying you. It is a hard, and I've never, and I guess as far as writing the book, and I may be getting a little bit of ahead of us here, but I was always on my social medias, very vulnerable and open about the hard of loving children from trauma.
Mm,
Everybody talks about the rainbows and butterflies and pretty smiling, happy pictures of adoption, but all adoption, even private infant adoption, is birthed out of loss and grief.
mm,
And people are sometimes don't want to talk about the hard aspects of adoption, but I always did. And I had people over the years, other adoptive mamas, saying, "You've got to write a book." And of course, I didn't have time for that. At one particular point, I had like 7 teenagers in my home. I was like, "I ain't got time for that." Exactly. And 5 of them were boys. I'd
oh
tell you
my,
my grocery bill, but it was astronomical. But so then whenever I went through the trial last year, I was like, you know what, I'm gonna write that book. So I took the opportunity to interweave in some of the just the really hard parts of
mm.
my kids as well, heartbreaking stuff.
Yeah, I love your vulnerability. Like that is something on Tuesday with Tamika that myself and our audience like truly prides itself on. We love folks that are transparent and that are vulnerable. I want to unpack some of the things that you said because it's so funny. Yesterday, me and my husband, we were coming home from the grocery store and we have 8 like together. So we're split
So you know what a full house looks like and feels like. Yeah.
Yes, that grocery bill is real.
Yes, yes, it is. The inflation wasn't, it's been, I guess, about 7 years now since my house was that full. So I'm glad I don't have that many in my house now. I'm down to just one. So I feel like I'm
Oh,
almost there.
lucky you. We have 6 now, and it is just I'm like, "I just bought that." Like, why is it
Right?
I know
Yep.
you know, but it's funny when we were coming home from the grocery store last night, my husband said he wants to adopt 2 kids, and I just gave him, like, bombastic side eye, like, "Sir, what is
Hmm.
wrong with you? Are you sure
Right?
they're called to this?" So I love that you are telling the truth because
Correct.
adoption is a beautiful, like, thing to do, and I am
Yeah.
so grateful for folks like you that take on that challenge, but there are some hard truths that come
There
along with it.
there is. There is. If you're doing it just because uh, it you think it'll make you feel good,
Mm,
because it's such a, if you're doing it for those reasons, I mean, and the reality is even if you're doing it for noble reasons of you want to, as there's, for my purposes, my kids were all older when I adopted them and they came from foster care. And so there's like, you want to uh, impact a life, change a life, make a difference. And those are all good and noble reasons. But then you have to kind of like, what if it doesn't go according to plan? Would you still do it if all your love and all the that you pour into this child, what if the outcome is not what you wanted?
mm,
Would you still do it? And that's where that kind of where the tire, the road meets rubber, whatever the saying is there, and that's where your real faith steps in. Am I doing this because I have a faith and a belief that God is good? He's called me to do this, and even if this is
mhm.
what I'm to do,
Whew,
if that's not it, then I mean, do some soul searching.
yeah. I want to unpack this, and I've never shared. I think what I'm getting ready to share here on the podcast, we're going into like episode 180 or so. And because I am a bonus mom, right? Me and my husband got together.
Sure,
I had 3, he had 5. And I love those babies as if,
of
I birthed
course.
them. But there is that what if in the back of my mind. What
Mm,
if after all the love I've poured into them, all the sacrifices I've made, all the there are sometimes because when me and my husband got married, my daughter was about 11 years old, but me and her were like, I mean, we were
sure.
besties. We were still sleeping in the bed together.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then I bring all these additional children into my life, and I'm stretched, and I
Correct.
always back of my mind, what if when they're adults, they say they don't want anything to do with me anymore?
Right. Right. That they don't
What if?
recognize you as a mom figure in their life.
Oh,
Yeah.
and that
Yeah.
is the dirty, the hard, the unpopular stuff that folks don't want to talk about that I
Yeah.
really want us to unpack. Because what a question that I have for you, and I definitely want to get into the book and the trial and all of those things, but I want to ask, what boundaries did you have to put in place, like around your heart, around what you were there any boundaries? Like, if you were to look back and say, I think I would have put a boundary here or done this a little bit more, or some things that you just like
Mhm.
instantly put in place to not only to protect you, to protect your marriage, to protect your biological
Mhm.
children, to protect your home. What did boundaries look like for you as you
Mhm.
were raising all these babies?
Gosh, that is kind of a hard question to completely unwrap because there is one side in that as far as loving them, I I always loved them with my whole heart. You know, I was all in. There was no boundary there, but I think kind of something that I had to um get clear in my mind and my heart and my spirit was like, okay, one of my boys, for example, he was 9 when we adopted him. He was 13 before he uttered mom the first time.
Oh,
So for 4 years, I took that, that reality that he would not acknowledge me as mom and he wouldn't say the words I loved you, and this child was the textbook of I'm going to prove that you don't love me type of
wow.
behaviors. I
Mhm.
had to It was hard, and I'm sure you kind of any mom can understand this, that you begin to think that maybe you're just not good enough.
Oh,
You're not good enough. If you just prayed more, if you just had more faith, if you just loved them better. So I had to recognize that um, I was a good mom
mm,
and I was doing the best I could.
mhm.
And ultimately, this child's heart and soul was in the hands of God.
Wow.
And I had to have faith that um, God loved them even more than I did. And so
Wow.
I guess that the boundary, and I don't know if that's quite the right definition of that, was just an understanding that my love
Mhm.
was not necessarily what was going to heal them. It's
Mm.
an important piece, yes, but that yes, they were children, but they were growing up, and kind of like that quote that you quoted at the beginning, ultimately it was in their hands to choose to accept that love, to receive that love, and to make the decision on what they were going to allow these storms that they've walked to create in their present and their future. And that my boundary was I would not take responsibility for what they chose
Oh.
to do with my love. So there's that. And then as they got older, there was the hard boundaries of love where, like the oldest, where it was kind of like he had turned 18 and um he it was not like a have a big fight and kick him out kind of thing. It was just like, I'm 18, I got a job, a car. I want to be able to come and go as I please. I've got life figured out. I'm ready to move out. And I'm like, well, you better
Good
move out
luck.
while you got figured out. So, it was just that I understood, like I studied the story of the prodigal son, like backwards, forwards, every translation I could read it in. And as I watched this child, 18, 19-year old, just fall on his face
Mm,
over and over, wind up in jail and homeless, and me fighting that urge to
mm,
go rescue
mhm,
and believing that that's what love would be, but then studying that passage and reading over and over. When he came to his senses,
mm.
he returned to the Father.
Yeah.
And I was like, not that I want to compare myself to Jesus, but it was that understanding that again, I would be doing love in this particular situation was not rushing out and bailing them out of jail. Love was like actually knowing the judge and saying, can you leave them in there the maximum amount of time? you know, so that was, kind of understanding that love also creates boundaries like that because
Yeah.
ultimately I wanted him to become the greatest version of himself, not the version of himself with mama doing everything for him.
Mm.
So,
That's good. I
I
read a quote
yeah,
once that said, "Love without boundaries creates chaos." So there
correct.
has to be
Yes,
some type of boundary or
right.
everything will be chaotic. I love what you said about your hard boundaries of love and that your love couldn't heal them. That I think is something that every mother, father, figure, auntie, uncle, anyone that's raised that has relationships with other human beings needs
Right.
to know and really like tattoo that on their heart because I
Mm,
think we often come into relationships either with our children with romantic relationships even
sure.
friendships with this preconceived notion that if we're good enough if we love them enough if we do all
Mhm.
the stuff it'll make them a better person then and in turn we'll get something in return and I once heard someone say that being a parent is a thankless job and once
Amen. Amen. Yeah, you don't, and that, eh, you know, you can say that and that makes sense. Nobody parents for what they can get out of it,
right.
but don't we still sometimes like expect? Geez, don't we really actually expect at least a thank you? And then when they kind of brush the dirt off their feet, walking out the door on us, it's kind of like, but you love them because they're your child, and
Yeah,
that's the only reason why,
that's
not because of what
um,
you can get out of it, but our flesh still definitely wants something out of it. We think we deserve it. We're entitled to it.
absolutely. As my kids are starting to transition, and a lot of them are in their early adult years and late teenage years. I'm there. There's different types of trials that come, and you can't parent the way that you did when they were little, and as they get older. And so, seeing them bump their head and make some mistakes is very hard. I want to kind of pivot a little bit into the trials of life and watching people bump them heads and like literally sitting out because if you think about this we're kind of like a juror in our kids lives because
Mhm.
we have to sit back sometimes and watch the scene play out hear all the evidence see all the things and give a unbiased opinion, especially when they're adults, and just say, these are the facts. If you do this, if you think you're grown because you turned 18 and you got a little change coming in, these are the things that are going to happen. You're going, food costs. I think kids forget all these things cost because we've always provided it for them.
Right?
So we we have
Yeah,
to
yeah,
sit, right? We have to sit
yeah.
back and be a juror and watch life. You had a real life experience, not only with all the children that flow through your beautiful home, but like literally sitting on a case. How did that? What was the intersection what lessons did you learn from what you were already doing as a foster mother and as an adopted mother sitting on that trial? Let's talk about that. Let's unpack because that is a
Sure.
huge part of your life that really led you to some of the work that you're doing today.
Correct. Yeah, it was. I think everybody, you think about jury duty and, there's all the jokes that, how do you get out of it and that kind of thing. And, I'm a professional, a wife, I'm active in my church. a mom, I'm a busy person. So
Mhm.
when and actually, I received the summons to report to jury duty during my daughter's wedding. So
Oh,
it was kind of like, and I had all this other kind of some really hard things going on with a couple of my boys. And, so that's where the book starts, is the day I got the summons, which was the day of my daughter's wedding.
oh my
So it's
gosh.
kind of like, awesome, I've got time for this. And if you don't know how jury duty works, when you get called to jury duty, uh, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to sit on a trial. You get called up and they go through, there might be, in this case, there's maybe about 50 or so that showed up. The case was a murder trial. The defendant was actually an older woman who had shot and killed her husband. The claim was self defense.
Mm.
And we were told it would probably take about 4 days to hear the whole trial. So there's like 50 people in there, and then they kind of go through a process that's called voir dire to get it narrowed down to what each of the counsels, defense and prosecution, ask lots of questions, and the judge as well, to try to find the 14 best individuals to be unbiased, and for there's 12 jurors for a jury hearing, but then they always pick two extras, two alternates, in case for some reason one of those 12 can't complete it or are removed for different reasons. There's a couple extra that sits through the whole trial and can deliberate. So I've been to that particular level or whatever a few times,
Okay.
but had never been selected. In this particular case, they got it down to, I don't know, 20 some odd individuals, and then all of our names kind of go in a bucket, and then they just randomly draw them out. And they say, okay, Jane Doe, juror number one, Tom Smith, juror number two. They go down the night where they got to juror number 11, and I heard my name called. And I was like, almost got out of it. But as I sat there and realized, okay, I have been selected, I begin to kind of get my mental state adjusted, in that the reality is that's a pretty uh, important role to play.
Mhm.
And I felt a huge sense of responsibility. Like, this is, it, hearing any case is important, but this was a murder trial. This was, I mean, we were literally determining the course of someone's life and a huge impact on the victim's family.
Mhm.
So, huge sense of responsibility for it. So I kind of tried to put my game face on and wanted to make sure that I did the very best of my ability to render a fair and correct both verdict and sentencing.
Now, in the
So,
back of your mind, are you thinking, well, it's because I hear you, you're like, okay, I make sure this is important. This is like serious business. But in the back of your mind, are you also thinking this is only 4 days, like 4 days of my life, and this is gonna be, I'm gonna get back to some sense of normacy.
well, there was that, and that, okay, there is an end to this, but at the same time, I mean, if you're like most women, I mean, like, to like totally have to check out for 4 days, that was kind of a lot when you have an extremely full schedule. So when we broke, once the jury had been selected and we broke for lunch, we were able to leave and kind of basically go take care of all your business. So fortunately, I am completely independent. I work from home. I'm mobile. So of course I go out to my car and I start sending the emails, making the phone calls, call my husband, all that, to basically clear my schedule for the rest of the week. So and then of course there was the overwhelming of like, okay, I don't really have time for this, but I got to do it, and we're going to make it work, and it's going to be okay.
Right.
I my theme a lot of time is, it's fine, I'm fine, everything's fine. We're going to get this rest out. Yeah.
Wow. So, okay, so now you are selected. And does it go the 4 days or?
It did. So yeah,
Okay.
it went the full 4 days. And if you're familiar with how our justice system works, I'm sure everybody knows that you're supposed to presume innocent until proven guilty, right?
Right.
And that is absolutely what I walked into that jury box with is she's, so there was no debate on whether she had actually killed him. The
Mhm.
debate of whether it was self-defense or that she had kind of planned and intended to kill him. So that
Okay.
was really the debate. She was charged with first degree murder. So was it really first degree or was it a lesser? So that was where the debate was. But you know, I had no problem or issue whatsoever walking in there with an innocent until proven guilty. What I didn't realize is that since the presumption is supposed to be innocent, they allow the prosecution kind of the upper hand in a
Mhm.
trial because the burden of proof is placed on the prosecution because we're supposed to assume they're innocent. So it makes sense that prosecution is given the upper hand. Sitting through it, it didn't seem fair
Mhm.
because you've got opening statements. Well, prosecution goes, oh, well, and I'll back up and say prosecution had four attorneys. The state had four attorneys, but then the defense, only had one private attorney. So
Oh.
you've already got that unequal weight of you've got four attorneys fighting this, and they're able to go first with opening statements. Then defense goes, well, then prosecution is able to basically come up and have a second chance at opening statements and rebut everything that was just said. Same
Mhm.
thing with witnesses. Prosecution goes first, then defense, closing statements. Again, prosecution goes first, defense, and then prosecution can have closing arguments to counteract everything that was just said. So I'm kind of like, that doesn't really seem fair.
Right.
Understand why, but I kind of struggled with that. And then a piece of it that really catapulted me into the mess I was in was, so the prosecution or the state, they had 17 witnesses, and that took a day and a half to go through all of them, that basically just over and over and over again proven that uh, she shot and killed him. And it's like, we already
We
know
know
that.
that.
Where is the intent? Where is that? And then also, if anybody who has watched any type of courtroom TV, whether it's real life or supposable real life, anyway, there's the drama in the courtroom as far as with the counsel. And I always thought that was always made for TV. But then sitting in, I was like, oh my gosh, like these people must have like minors in theater, and like the stomping and yelling and and I was like, I understand the need to hold our attention, but then again, I'm very much a facts-based person. I was like, I'm not interested in being entertained. I just want the facts. And so all of these
Do you think
witnesses,
that that's because of your background in, like, finances? Is that kinda, like, where that comes from, or is that has that always just been your
I'm
person?
very much, and this again was another one of my struggles. I'm very much a analytical person.
Mhm.
I'm a researcher at heart. I love to research and analyze, and yeah, that as far as my professional, yeah, I'm always researching and analyzing numbers and investments and that kind of thing. But uh, I like to. I don't like taking things at face value. I like to dig a little bit deeper, and I also am. I feel like one of my strengths is separating emotion from fact.
Mm,
So a lot of these witnesses and testimony were delivered in very much an emotionally manipulative way,
mm,
in that you have a daughter of the victim giving testimony that was easy to ascertain that she was estranged from her father and had no communication for him for a very long time, but yet so was unable to give any testimony as far as her father's character or whether or not he was an alcoholic, and not to minimize the trauma that she went through losing her father through a violent means, but still, I felt like the only reason she was placed on the stand was for us jurors to see a family member cry. You
Mm.
see what I'm saying? Like, I'm like, mm, okay, we still aren't getting back to the issue of where's the, was there intent or was she acting in self-defense? This isn't, and then things like an autopsied, blown up picture of the victim during testimony. I'm like, we know he died and then he died of a gunshot wound. Why? You see
Right.
what I'm saying? Like, it's like, and then to kind of, try to fast forward just a little bit. So then it's the defense's turn to give testimony, to call witnesses. Well, she had 14. And with each one that was called, the state objected to them being called as a witness, and it was sustained. And only 3 of her witnesses, her being one of them, were allowed to speak. And what I discovered, that in a jury trial, you're not allowed to ask questions. You're you're supposed to only listen, do as you're told. They prefer if you go with the group think, and understand that information is cherry picked, and
Mm.
you can consider nothing other than the cherry picked information which is presented in the case. And
Wow.
I struggled hard with that. I was kind of like, you've tasked us with the responsibility as being the judge in the case, but yet if it were a bench trial with a real judge, they would know what these witnesses were going to testify about and
Mhm.
why it was not allowed. And here we are assigned the task as being the judge, but we weren't allowed to know. And
Wow.
I struggled with it. And then I also struggled with the fact that so many of the other jurors didn't seem to have issue with that. Like,
Mm.
you see, I'm like, and in the book, I'm very open with how, and vulnerable with how emotionally and even spiritually trying it was on me. I mean, I really had a breakdown in that deliberation room, and I kind of lay it all out there.
Why do
Uh,
you think so? Why do you think it was like it sounds like you were really not connected's not the right word, but not attached. It did something to you and for you. And why? Why do you think so?
well, like, I know because I was forced to put my faith in this justice system. I
Mm.
was forced to I was forced to say, okay, Katrina, um, you have to make your decision based only what was presented in this trial. That's the way our justice system works. And I'm in a position where I'm going to have to put my faith in it. And I didn't like that. And then, and in doing so, it forced me, as we went around that room to issue a verdict, to say the words guilty against
Mm.
another human being.
Wow.
And I did not realize how difficult it would be for me to utter that word guilty.
Wow.
And yeah, so that was where
Do
I
you
was.
think if the lady on trial was like a younger woman, do you think like her age or her ethnicity like played into any of your biases or any of your like, do you think it would have been different if it was a younger woman or
Um, I mean, I want to say that it wouldn't have been.
Mm.
Um, I mean, you want to say that unfortunately, the reality is we all have biases that we like to try to separate ourselves from. I like to say I work hard to not allow them to. I mean, I want to say it wouldn't have. Um, you know, I will say that it was my gut, my intuition, my emotions, my feelings, whatever you want to call it, that was like I wanted to believe that she truly was innocent of murder
Mm.
because she was acting in self-defense. That's what
Mhm.
I wanted to believe. But I could not. The problem was none there was no testimony or evidence allowed that had anything that was allowed if it had anything to do with the victim's character, behavior, actions. None of that was allowed, which I
Mm.
didn't think was fair.
Mm.
Um, but I had to take my gut, my intuition, my feelings about it out of the equation and just focus on what was presented.
I
And
just
that
got
was
a
what,
huge
yeah,
I'm having like this big old right
yeah,
now because
yeah,
this is so parallel to being a mom, a foster mom and an adoptive mom, right? And I'm sure
right,
you probably make these connections in your book because imagine if you didn't get any prerequisites or any information about these children and you had to decide if you want them to like live with you and be in your home and to
mhm,
because we know epigenetics is real, right? So biology, no matter how much going back to that quote you said, no matter how much love you gave them, you couldn't heal them. So there's some things that are just in their genetics, in their DNA,
absolutely,
no matter how
absolutely,
much you pray things and all that, right?
you're right,
So imagine just like with this, and correct me if I'm wrong or help me to like probably make this come clearer. I I wonder if sitting on that juror duty, doing your jury duty and having to say guilty to another human being without knowing her character, what was her background, what was trauma that she faced, what
correct,
was she a
yeah,
good person besides this
right,
isolated incident, like all of these things, right? How did that impact the way you continue to mother? How did that even play into your in some of your own traumas and the work that you've done with being a foster mother, being adoptive mother? Did that create any type of like, oh, what's the word I'm looking for? Like cognitive dissonance and like disruptive thinking in your own just life? I want to know how
right,
it's all
right.
kind of strung together and played along.
Well, it, so ultimately I kind of back up. It's like, so how did I wind up in contempt of court and then a mistrial granted?
Yes.
If we just jump to that. So I've already said I was struggling greatly. And I'll say that absolutely, you said, there's so much that comes into play with a person's actions and behaviors, both genetically, and I love knowing people more intimately and hearing their stories, like the real stories. And as I sat through that trial, I felt like, I really didn't know anything about this defendant other than she was a 60-year-old woman who taught piano most of her life, felt threatened by her husband and shot and killed him.
Wow.
I knew nothing about her. The victim I knew even less about. All I knew is that there were some allegations that he was an alcoholic and abusive, and he died by bullet wound from his wife. That's all I knew. And like I said, and I think the fact that I know how much your story and your history and your past play a part into things is why I struggled so much. So the day before we were to go into deliberations, I was struggling so greatly with, I just want to know who they really were. But as a juror, you're not allowed to research, you're not allowed to talk, you can't ask questions. And I was like, I'm okay with that, researching the case part of it, because that's what they drill into you. You can't research the case, right? Because I feel like I know more about the case than probably anybody or any old newspaper article I could dig up. But I don't know, especially that victim. I don't
Mm.
know him. So I was able to rationalize in my mind that they defined all the parties in the case and they didn't include him because he's not present, right?
Ah,
So I was like, I just want to see if I can learn something about him. I typed his name into a database, nothing came up. I
mm.
spent maybe 5 minutes just seeing if I could find anything of him, and then resigned myself to the fact that Katrina, just let it rest and trust the process, that this is the way that you have to, that it has to be. Well, open, vulnerable, transparent person. And so as I'm having that emotional breakdown in the jury room, after we'd already deliberated and decided on a verdict and sentencing, and as we were just kind of awkwardly waiting to be called back into the courtroom, I had made the comment, not to anybody in particular, that I struggled so greatly with all of the like witnesses that weren't allowed to speak and that kind of thing. I said I wanted to learn more about the victim and tried to look him up, but I couldn't find anything about him. Didn't say it to anybody in particular. Moved on. We all went out. We issued our unanimous decision. It was not guilty on first, but guilty on second. I left the courtroom and actually sat in my car for about half an hour just trying to, that's
Yeah.
over. 3 days later, another jury member went back to the courthouse and filed a juror misconduct complaint against me.
No way.
Correct. And so then the defense attorney then grabbed hold of that complaint, and he's the one that asked for contempt of court to be filed against me and asked for a mistrial to be granted. So that is what then started the snowball of hell for the next few months for me. Yeah. So
Oh, and literally all you're trying to do is be fair. Like when being
correct.
fair and being like just and being and not wanting to wrongfully imprison another human goes wrong was a person,
Right.
right?
Right. And it, so and then it was kind of like it at one point it's kind of like you ever feel like you've been dropped off in some sort of twilight zone. It's like, what in the world is happening? And I think that, whenever I put the book out there, is very something I was very scared to do because you kind of like putting a piece of yourself out there. And anytime you do that, you open yourself up to people not liking you, attacking you. And it's
Yeah.
kind of like, this is kind of a piece of me I'm putting out there. But I ended up having a really positive response. And I think it's not because anybody could necessarily relate to that particular craziness in the justice system. I haven't run into other jurors that have gone through that. Now, there are foster and adoptive moms that have been through hard with their adoptive children. But I think it was just the ability to relate to, we've all at some point feel like we've kind of been sucker punched by life, or I mean, or even God himself has kind of pulled the rug out from underneath of us. And we're like, what in the world? Like, I'm trying to do what you've asked me to do, God.
Literally
Why?
all 2023. I'm like, really? Like, really?
Yeah, like, and the fact that I was able to be honest in the hard questions I was asking, like, okay, God, do you really love me?
Mm.
Um, because it really doesn't feel like you love me, because this does not feel like a loving God would allow his child to walk through. And so it was, I think that's why I kind of had the positive response from people, is because it's hard for some people to, because if you vocalize that, like right now I'm studying Job really, really in depth. And, his friends were kind of like, um, Job was a very honest person. He's, in
Mhm.
fact, he even calls God his enemy. He's
Yeah.
like, God won't hear me. God is out to get me. He's destroying me. He's my enemy. And his friends were like, whoa, Job, maybe there's just something wrong in your life. Maybe
Mhm.
you've got sin you need to confess. And so sometimes I think we do the same thing. Like with my adoptions and other moms' adoptions, if they say the reality of what they're facing every day with these kids, if they put that out there, that it's just going to look bad on them. Like, well, you must just not be doing it right. You must
I
not
wrote
be
a
praying hard
blog,
enough.
years ago. Oh, maybe like 5, 10 years ago now. And it got the most response of any blog that I've ever written. And it said like something like, can we be honest? And I was like, being a parent sucks. And I like talked about all the things that I hated about being a mom. And at that time I was a single mom. So I was like,
Mhm.
this
Yeah.
sucks. Like I don't like how they eat before me, like I have to give, like all the
Right, right.
people like to paint this beautiful picture of the sacrifice, but I think that I think that you are so right. And when people gravitate to authenticity and to transparency because we're all feeling it. Like the human experience is tough. And really, if you search the scriptures, there's a scripture I remember learning in Sunday school, and it says, search the scriptures, for in them ye think ye have eternal life, but they are they which testify of me. And I held that scripture and like to my heart because
Mhm.
we read the scriptures about like David and all these. I believe it's David that wrote most of the Psalms.
Oh,
And
yeah,
this
absolutely.
guy was going through, like, one minute he's like, I
Yeah.
praise you, Lord, because you're so wonderful. And then the next minute he's like, are you ever gonna help my are you ever gonna
Exactly,
he's like, dude,
exactly, and that's one thing I struggled with, during some of not just during the period of the trial, but through some other really dark times with my children
yeah,
where you feel this like pressure. Well, if you're a good Christian, you'll still put on your happy face and have joy and talk about how great God is. And I'm like, I'm not feeling that. And that seems so fake, and I can't go there. And one of my favorite Bible characters became Naomi. And
mm,
if you're familiar with her and her story, she's hidden in there in the book of Ruth. And the most of the book of Ruth is this love story between she and Ruth and Boaz, right? But the book starts with the story of Naomi, where she
yeah,
and her husband and her sons are forced out of their land because of a famine. They go to a foreign land. Well, then I don't know how much time passes, but her sons get married to these foreigners. They both die. Her husband dies. And she's struggling with that, and she's angry
yes.
with God about it. And I mean, can we fault her? You know?
To the
Um,
point she's like, don't even call me Naomi anymore.
exactly. That's what I was going to get to is so, and then, this is where Ruth kind of becomes the hero because she has no obligation to stick with her, not even really mother-in-law anymore, but she does because as Naomi then travels back because she hears the famine's over, Ruth insists on going with her. And I think it's because even though Naomi seems like she's kind of a cranky, bitter old woman at this point, she knew Naomi's heart and
Yeah.
she loved her. And so Naomi gets back to where she came from, and all these other women that I guess stuck it out through the famine. You see that Naomi must have been a well-respected and loved woman because they excitedly greet her, and that's when she says, "Don't call me Naomi." And I
Mhm.
look up what Naomi means, and I think it's like peaceful and gentle. And she
Yes.
says, "I am not Naomi because the Lord sent me away full. He's brought me back empty."
Oh,
And I'm like, and I fell in love with her because she was okay with saying that. And then I just know that all of her friends were kind of like, let's tread lightly around Naomi. Um, but she, because she wasn't willing to plaster that smile on her face. And, but and then so the rest of the story then is so that's just the very very beginning. All of
yeah,
that and then the rest of the book is then Ruth and Boaz and their
all
love
this
story.
good stuff.
But then at the very end, Naomi takes center stage again, and those same women that had probably spent some time gossiping about her as
Oh,
far
yeah.
as y'all, Naomi, she kind of cranky.
They're calling her Mara by this point, right? Which Mara
Right,
loves
right. They're
her
like,
because she's like, I'm just a bitter. Now she's self-proclaiming that she's bitter. She's
right,
mad of all of these
yeah.
things that happen.
Right, and so but those same women, then come to her and they bring the child to her, the baby, that the firstborn of Ruth and Boaz, and they place him on her lap, and that joy returns to her. And I can almost just kind of I I think it's apparent that she never lost her faith in
Yeah.
God, but she was battling some really real and raw emotions, just like Job never lost his faith in God, but he was honest and real with, I'm going through some stuff right now, and I'm not gonna just fake it till I make it. Now, there may be some days, kind of like David, well, I'm faking it till I make it. And then the next day, I can't fake it anymore. This is tough. But I think as they set that child on her lap and it goes to the genealogy, I mean, she's included in the line of Christ. God was okay with her being like, I am bitter. I am not even Naomi anymore. He was okay with that. And I think, you know, Naomi was able to kind of like finally exhale and say, God is good,
Yeah.
good,
And
even though it doesn't always feel that way.
this is so good, and I could
Yeah.
literally I love talking Bible. I like it's like one of my favorite things, and I
Uh-huh.
could literally talk to you all day about just different parallels and what I'm even like kind of piecing together is imagine if like because you said it with the book of Ruth, we got a very small snapshot of who Naomi was, but that small snapshot is important. What her name meant, because especially back then, not so much
Right,
now.
it's important.
It
Yeah.
was important, right? Like they got
Yeah.
inherited names that meant something, and this is how you were gonna like really live your life. Imagine that lady in the courtroom or that man in the courtroom if we knew just a snapshot of who they were, how things
Right.
have been different for both of them. But through all of this, God restored your joy and you were able to produce a beautiful book. I want to transition into you sharing about that book and some of the work that you are now doing through that trial, through that bitter period, through that hardship, and how it has shaped just you as a woman, you as a wife, you
Right.
as a mother. I really want to get into that. And then I also want to share as we're getting ready to wrap up how the TWT family, because I know they're like, I like her. First of all, the Southern accent had me at hello. Second of all, just the way that you're able to tell stories. I know that there's folks that are listening to the podcast that would love to connect with us or connect with you. So please tell us more about your book and how through that trial, you were able to really produce a treasure. One of our founding principles is turning our trials into treasure. So you were able to produce a treasure, and then how the TWT family can get in contact with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I would say that kind of the foundation cornerstone of my book and my story is my faith. Yes, I'm very vulnerable and raw and honest about the hard and the struggles and the emotion. But again, as I mentioned, separating that emotion from fact. Emotion is a very real thing, but you still have to go back to the fact of yes, God is good. Yes, God loves me. And so allowing yourself, throughout the entire book, I'm very honest about those times where I, kind of sat in my ash pile, if you may, and cried and asked the hard questions and said, I don't like this. I don't want to do this. But then making that decision
Mm,
to rise back up out of that ash pile and continue to put one foot in front of the other and trust God anyway. And even though all of the emotions and really even facts don't seem to line up with what you believe to be the
mm,
truth. And that's where that kind of faith really gets real. So that is kind of the foundation of my story. And when I've had people reach out to me to speak and we talk about different topics, I'm like, if you're wanting to have a speaker come in and talk about the power of prayer and all that, I will, but I can't separate. I was like, prayer is powerful, but what are you going to do when it doesn't seem like he answers your prayer? But because that's where I think we lose some people and people
mhm,
fall away. And um and so as far as the specific story with the trial and stuff. So after I had written the book and had decided I was going to publish it, I don't use any names in the book, but the defendant in the case, although I don't use her name, she's obviously kind of a central role in the story. And so I felt like I needed to reach out to her and
yeah,
let her know that I was writing a book and telling the story. And so when I did, I had no idea if she'd respond or even get the message, but she did respond. And when she did, she said, Yahweh has used you to preserve my life. And I will forever be grateful for him, no
Oh,
matter what happens. And through that, we've since developed a relationship and kind of that, same moment of, I say talk about uh, Ruth setting the women setting the child on Naomi's lap and her probably breathing that exhale and saying, God is good. Mine was listening to the defendant from that trial teach my son piano through a video screen while in the walls of a prison. And that
mm.
was kind of like God is good. Um, so yeah, I made some big
Katrina, that's
circles.
so good. Oh my gosh, that's so good.
It's I guess what I and to circle back to I guess to something that you were saying of one of y'all's kind of core purposes and stuff is I'm a firm believer in, not wasting a trial, not wait and me writing the book it was not only cathartic, therapeutic for me, but part of I think not wasting a trial is telling your story.
Mhm.
Um, even if it maybe isn't quite in as public as a manner of publishing a book, but even if it's just one-on-one with people, I mean, just tell your story because your story through that, not only does healing come from you for you, but to others as well. And it's through the telling of that that you begin to learn and grow, and that trial is not wasted.
Yeah.
Um,
Mm.
yeah.
That's so good. So, where can the TWT audience get in contact with you? Where can we purchase the book? We will have all the links in the show notes, but I would love for you to share how we can continue this conversation offline with you. How can we get in contact with you?
Well, I do have a website. It's Katrina L. Robertson.com. So there's the website and there's a link to the book and stuff there. But the book is real easy to find on Amazon if you just search Juror number 11, and that's hashtag 11. The subtitle is a memoir of the broken justice system and rising from the trials of life. It's easy to find there. It's paperback, ebook or Kindle, whatever. And then I did record an audio book for those that are audiobook listeners. Full disclosure, I did it myself though. So uh, it was a huge learning curve trying to learn all of the audio type stuff, but it was important for me to put it in my voice. But it's certainly not, I'm not a professional voiceover, but it is out there and available.
I love that. I am a audio listener, so that is how I will be getting the book because and again, I love your southern accent, so I got to hear it in your voice. Katrina, how about online? Where are you hanging out these days? Where can they connect with you online?
I'm pretty active on Facebook. It's a personal page, it's not so all of my personal stuff is out there. But you can find me if you do Katrina Robertson, especially if you do like Arkansas, you'll find me. I'm on Instagram, same thing, but they certainly are not business accounts. They're just me and my kids and my dogs.
Well, listen, we love to see it and we can't wait to connect with you. Katrina, thank you so much for sharing this afternoon with us and sharing your story. The work that you are doing is definitely kingdom work. And we appreciate you here on Tuesday with Tamika. Tuesday with Tamika family, we thank you. We thank you. We thank you. Don't forget to go over to Apple Podcast, Spotify, and on YouTube. Make sure you guys follow us on YouTube and share the podcast, rate the podcast, give us those 5 stars because you guys know the algorithm be trying to hide all this goodness. But when you give us those 5 stars, it boosts us and we're able to be seen in front of more audiences. Also, don't forget that in the month of January, we will be doing a Empower Her Boundaries free masterclass. If you're interested, click the link in the bio, go over to tuesdaywithtamika.com and learn more about that. Remember to live a life to inspire and not impress. Remember to lift others as you climb. Remember to turn every single trial into a treasure, just like Katrina did. Remember to open up and allow God to fully restore you. And our new founding principle, remember to love as if you have never been hurt. Because, like Katrina said, hard boundaries of love, and no matter how much you love people, you can't heal them, but we still have to be open to it. Until next week, bye bye.